Good afternoon. My name is Robert Walker, and I'm brand manager for retirementhomes.com. Welcome to our January webinar, the first of 2012. We are North America's leading online senior housing directory and resource, which includes our housing directory, our online library, and e-newsletters. We also offer, free of charge, the top experts in senior living each month who will share their knowledge in the fields of marketing, research, sales, and related areas in webinars such as the one you're about to hear. This month, we present Michael Sullivan of 50 Plus Communications Consulting, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Michael's presentation, Strategies for Effective Verbal Communication with Seniors, will share techniques which we can use to help us verbally communicate more effectively with seniors. Michael is the author of the book Financial Relationships with Seniors, as well as a member of the National Speakers Association. He also serves as chairman for the Council on Aging for Charlotte, North Carolina. There will be a Q&A session at the end. If you would like your questions answered, simply raise your hand in the toolbar on the right, type in your question into the screen, and will be answered at the end of the presentation. Now, Michael, please be my guest.
Thank you, Robert. I'm happy to be here and very excited about the presentation. It's something I've been working on for 20 years or so, and gathering a lot of information, talking with a lot of people involved, and training and teaching people how to be more effective communicating with seniors. I'd like to share with you a picture that I find this kind of interesting. This was from Rolling Stones magazine about 20 years ago. Some things just weren't meant to be. About 20 years ago, we probably thought we'd never see a granny driving a motorcycle. But today, that's sort of a common occurrence. You just can't tell the difference because they've got masks and their helmets and all that. But the other thing is we exist in a society that resists aging, so it's interesting that we get a comment like this from a younger group. On the other hand, here's a more powerful one that appeared in AARP's magazine featuring Lena Horne, who was about 85 years old at this time. And the producer, Fran Flakes, is saying, let's show somebody who is leading an active life. So they put her in this picture with active retirement clothing. It's a meta message that signals older people may be old, but that doesn't mean they're disconnected or not involved. I'd like to start this session with something I always do, a communications quiz. And what I'd like you to do is give you a couple of seconds to have you answer true or false to these questions, and then I'll provide the answer. Number one, true or false? All five senses, which are touch, taste, smell, vision, and hearing, tend to decline in the aging process. What do you say? It's true. All five senses tend to decline, and what happens with that decline, it tends to be fairly deep. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the important ones in communicating, and that's vision and hearing, which we call the remote senses. Number two, only 10% of those over 50 are experiencing some form of hearing loss. My wife laughs at me and says, "What'd you say? What'd you say?" It's more like 50% of people over 50 have experienced some form of hearing loss. Boomers are a great example of that. Those that are in the bracket up to age 66 this year, they have experienced it, and about a third have been tested because they're concerned about hearing loss and being some ways to deal with it. Unfortunately, it's because they kept the amplifiers up too high for those rock concerts and other things. So hearing wasn't protected in those early years. Here's number three. Boomer women will spend more time caring for their parents than their children. True or false? Unfortunately, it is true. And when I speak to audiences, women roll their eyes and say, "Oh no, I got other kids to raise, my parents." What happens is the numbers show that we spend 17 years or so from birth to putting kids off to college or off to careers or military, and then we end up spending more years with our parents. And as the longevity issue takes place, they're going to be spending more time with their parents. Mental confusion is an inevitable consequence of aging. What do you say? It is false. It's not an inevitable consequence of aging. There are a number of things that make mental confusion occur, but it is not inevitable. The issue is that when we see an older person, we might conclude that there's some mental confusion going on, or it may be something as simple as hearing. It may be something, just any number of other kinds of things. Number 5. Modern brain research shows that older adults tend to become more right brain oriented as they age. True or false? Well, I think you know I'm leading in that direction, and the answer is yes, that's true. And later on in this program, I'm going to give you some ideas for you to deal with this shift over to the right hemisphere of the brain. You know, we've got some muscle numbers in place. You are in a business that has longevity built all the way through it. And it's, according to the numbers, by the year 2020, the over 50 segment grows by 74%, while the under 50 age segment grows only 1%. Today, the average age of all people in our country is 44. But by 2020, it's going to be 48. One of the interesting target households for us is those age 55 to 64 in the retirement community business. And that's the fastest growing segment of our population. It's going to be a considerable amount of time before that changes. I'd like to introduce one thought that comes from the gerontology, and that is chronological age versus cognitive age. When we're older, we are marked by the calendar, the chronological age, but we're not marked by what age we think we are, the cognitive age. And usually we think we're about 15 years younger than we are. Now, some of this is a result of a society that sends out so many anti-aging messages, but most of it is that's the way we feel about ourselves. New subject. If we're going to sell to different generations, then let's look at how and why each generation is different. I love this quote. I haven't been able to find out who came up with it, but it relates to the power of our generational background. Men resemble the times more than they do their fathers. Men resemble the times more than they do their fathers. What does that mean? Well, it means members of a generation are linked through the shared life experiences of their formative years. Let's look at some of the differences between generations. The matures, age 67 and up, baby boomers, 48 to 66, and Generation X, 30 to 47. Obviously, when we're talking matures, we're talking elders, we're talking about the very advanced age also. Let's look at your life. You're linked to the shared life experiences of your formative years. Those were those teens, late teens and early 20 years. And you respond to situations today based on that information. We're influenced by our life history. It's not so much how old we are, but what were the times like when we were younger. Let's look at what the times were like for the greatest generation, those 67 and up. In their early years, and they were influenced by the cross-Atlantic flight for the first time, Charles Lindbergh, the Spirit of St. Louis. They're influenced by the Depressions, and that causes many of them to be concerned about having things today. Oftentimes, older women in retirement communities will store up apples and oranges that they take from the lunch and crackers and keep them hidden, because this is a result of having come through a time in which there was depression and there was a tremendous need of want. And then we have World War II and its influence on us, which ended in the atomic bomb used in Hiroshima and in Japan. So if you look at the generational differences, the greatest generation has a respect for authority. It's frugal, watches its pennies. It's responsible. It feels that a promise made is a promise to be kept. Very cautious. And totally, totally loaded up on self-sacrifice for the family. Selling to the greatest generation, you need to establish trust first. And in some of the things I'll talk about later, you'll be able to see how that gets accomplished. You need to create a physical, positive physical sales setting that's amenable to being an older person being able to hear and understand what you're saying. One caution I have for you is don't call them senior citizens, because one of the things is about a third of those who might be in that senior citizen category don't like the term. In fact, I suggest you don't call them anything. If you're dealing with boomers, don't call them boomers to their face. They don't like that either. What I do suggest is that you use a more nuanced way to speak to them, and that is people like yourself who I know or I deal with say do whatever. And then I suggest you display pictures of your children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, because family is so vital and so important to people of age. So we look at the boomer generation, it's age 48 to 66. Boomer generational DNA is significant to your business. Let's look at some of the events that occurred in their early teen years. Woodstock, Neil Armstrong, the man on the moon, we can do anything was the message. The shootings at Kent State by the National Guard, accidental shootings that occurred during Vietnam War protests. The Vietnam Memorial. And so somebody has chronicled what it is that boomers' differences, and don't trust anyone over 30. I think it was Abby Hoffman who said that. And what happens is that now they've got to say don't trust anyone over 60. Make love, not war, which is a real strong feeling about where your priorities ought to be. And then the LSD movement with Tim Leary, turn on, tune in, drop out. And finally, as it relates to war, hell no, we won't go. So the boomer mantra is forever young. Boomers literally think they'll die before they get old. That's lyrics from Peter Townsend from The Who. That's kind of interesting because that really exemplifies the ageist society that we're talking about and the ageism with a certain part of the population. They do want to take control. Boomers do not want to turn that authority over to someone else, no matter what's going on in their lives, how busy they are, how stressed they are. And overall, they're very much environmentalists. They're very much into women's movement. They're into racial kinds of equity. Save the world is part of their mantra. So you look at generational differences. The boomers focus on themselves. Some people have called that the journey to the interior, being focused on me, the me generation. Distrusting authority, especially large institutions, and leading successful, stressful lives that beg for simplification. Because with many individuals, they're two-income families, they're raising their children, they're taking care of their grandparents, their parents and grandparents, and that makes the sandwich generation very difficult on them. We're going to talk about the physical side of aging, and here's a definition. It's a little bit long, but hang in there. A normal phenomenon which results in a decreased overall physiological capacity of a person to withstand the stresses of everyday living. Our challenge is to reduce stressful situations in the selling and the serving process of our clients in this, and patients and residents in this age group. Well, it's pretty sure by 50, you're not the same person physically, psychologically, and emotionally. Change is prevalent. The physical changes occurring in the natural aging process make aging boomers and older residents different than younger ones. I saw a quote the other day that said, nobody knows what it's like to be 70 unless they're there. And that's a caution to younger people who are dealing with older clients. Most of the staffs of your facilities have deal with younger. Have most employee base is younger. Now let's look at some of the remote senses, vision and hearing. This is vision loss as we age. On the bottom axis is on the horizontal axis at the bottom is the age, 60, 80, 100 on the right side. On the left axis is the amount of decline that takes place with age. And you can see the greatest decline starts to occur around age 60, and it's pretty substantial. So what are the issues with this vision decline? Seeing near objects becomes more difficult. I recommend you have a number of different prescription reader glasses in your conference table if that's where you take people of age to be able to talk to them, because oftentimes they're going to forget their glasses and their reading glasses, and they're going to need some help there. And that's a nice courtesy to deal with them. The loss of depth perception occurs with aging. One of the things that happens is that oftentimes you notice an older person put their hand down on the chair before they go to sit down in the chair. Why is that? It's because they can't tell the difference between the pattern in the chair and the pattern in the carpet. And they don't want to fall. Falling can be really, really significant. I've read some numbers that say as many as 25% of people who've suffered a loss by falling die within the first year. There are problems with external glare. The outside lighting that comes in causes them to have things. Sometimes if we seat ourselves in front of a window that has bright light shining in, they can't see us. We look like we have a halo. And that's not what we want to have accomplished. We need to flip the situation and have them with their back to the outside glare. They need more internal lighting just to be able to read. And one of the things that happens, a 50-year-old needs twice as much lighting as a 25-year-old. An 80-year-old needs 3 times as much lighting. So it's pretty significant. So what do you do when you're sitting face-to-face with them? And that's what you do. You sit face-to-face with them. Because they might be lip reading, especially older males who will not admit that they need hearing aids. Although that's changed somewhat in this modern society. Increase the use of hand gestures for important points. Not all the time, but when you're trying to make a point, and sometimes when they wander off, that's helpful in getting them to come back to what it is that you're talking about when you see their eyes wandering. Reduce your sentences. Use shorter sentences and pause occasionally. Pauses can be very effective for you. Speak at a slower pace, but not in a patronizing manner. I'm speaking this slowly because I know you have some hearing issues and you can't hear me. They're insulted by that. Avoid fast-paced movements because you appear out of control, and who wants to do business with someone who's out of control? And a simple thing, avoid looking at your watch. One of the things that happens with age is we lose a sense of time, and my recommendation, if it is possible, is to have a large clock on the wall, a digital, not an analog clock, facing them, so that the two of you can judge the time that's involved in a selling situation, for example. And one of the things I would say is, Mrs. Smith, we have 10 more minutes, and what would you like me to cover in those 10 minutes? Or I'm suggesting we cover this in those 10 minutes. Written communications is a different issue. First of all, printed matter is the most credible source of information for people of age. You should be going to a 12 to 14 point type size without serif, the little stems at the bottom of the letter. Avoid using italics. It puts less ink on the page. It's harder to read. These things also work for website design. Avoid screening or putting pictures in the background that are meant for an artistic touch. In fact, one of the things you need to get understanding is that the people who design your communications oftentimes are younger. The business gravitates toward young people, and they have no sense of the kinds of things that need to be accomplished. Keep your sentences short. Very hard to stop at 10 to 12 words. But it's those prepositional phrases that we add on, by the time that, for this, just any number of things that make the sentences too long and therefore more difficult to understand. Hold a paragraph to 4 to 5 lines, not what they taught you in college or your high school, your English teacher, but you need to keep things short. You need to indent paragraphs. The more white space you deliver to the surface, the better. One of my suggestions is to follow the USA Today newspaper style. They use plenty of visuals, pictures, and other things. They use color coding to help us understand it very, very quickly. They use factoids in the lower left-hand column of each section, which are interesting because it's a combination of some visual and a few words. And they use a journalistic style of communicating. Hearing loss as we age. Here's the chart similar to the one we saw before. This one has an element of male versus female. Follow the red trend on the way down. You can see that with age, older males' hearing tends to decline faster than females. This is particularly important when you have a receptionist or an aide or associate who is answering the phone as a young female who talks and can't help but talk in a higher pitch. That's where older males have their greatest problems, in the higher pitch area. So what are the hearing decline issues? Hard to hear on the telephone, harder. With the normal ear, we have a range of 20,000 cycles. On the phone, it contains that only 600. So you need to understand when you're on the telephone to slow down your conversation. Don't talk like you speak to your young friends or your young children or whatever. We strain to understand conversations. You can see that by their furrowed brow. Cannot follow when several people talk at once. Or background noises interfere and disrupt hearing. Misunderstanding words, you can sense that. If they go, huh, when you're done, or you get almost no response to what you say, and there should have been a response, you know you didn't connect. So go back and repeat it, saying it a different way. You want to ask people to repeat what they said. Oftentimes they ask people to do that. They think other people mumble, and they're affected by sleep disorders and tiredness, which is something that occurs pretty dramatically with age. So hearing decline techniques: signal visually before speaking, look directly at the person, lower your pitch, stay in a logical sequence, repeat or paraphrase, sit at the same level, pronounce words clearly and slowly, and don't change the topic abruptly like you would do with your younger friends, younger people. But you're making it harder for them to understand. Now I want to deal with what I consider to be probably the most important part of this presentation is this sales concept. Senior adults 50 and older process information differently with age. Decision making is different. Modern brain research shows that older adults tend to become more right brain oriented as they age. In the second half of their life, our cognition patterns become less left brain and more right brain oriented. Right brain statement is more effective in getting an early favorable response from them. Here's a great graphic depiction of hemispheres of the brain, the left brain and the right side of the brain. You can see in the middle is something called the corpus callosum, which is the connector that connects the two sides of the brain. And we move instantaneously at warp speed, going back and forth with ideas and connections and so forth. The left side of the brain, as you can see, is like the numbers 1 through 9. It's orderly, time-oriented. It's tend to be where we're analytical. It's where we are when we're planning our time, planning our day, looking at our watch. Over on the right side of the brain is a whole different area. And you can see its wholeness perception, its problem solving, pattern, faces. Interesting that when we see somebody we know, you can say, I remember the face, I just can't remember the name. Part of that is that visual is stored in a different part of the brain than verbal, the description of those faces. When we think about who is more right brain oriented naturally, do we think men or women? I think the answer is clearly women, because that's where momism is, the natural humanist tendencies, and that's where all of that is. In fact, I've always said that women have a better way to deal with people of age. Let's go more so at each side. The left side is our scientific brain. It's analytical, logical, and orderly. It's precise, time-oriented, and concerned with definite plans. It's what we use to organize our thoughts and comprehend alternatives. With age, verbal memory, recalling and remembering words, declines faster than visual memory. The right side of the brain, however, is our artistic brain. Creative, concerned with color, images, fantasy, deals with perceptions, patterns, and problem solving. It frankly knows what is good for us personally, which gives us the ability to choose among alternatives that we're presented. Right brain concepts, we use them by explaining unfamiliar concepts in ways that make them part of their prior experiences, part of an older person's prior experience. It's like this, Mrs. Smith. Pictures and other visual cues, word images, which are substitute for pictures, similes and analogies. It's like this. Let me show you how you can remember how this used to be. Now, when we say to somebody, let me tell you a story, because storytelling is an important part of using the right side of the brain. And that's when the red light goes on. That's when people become very much interested. They love to hear your stories because of what the stories connote. They connote you, your value system, and all that. So be interested in the kind of stories that you have, and listen to their stories, because they have many stories, many of those dealing with an earlier part of their lives. I've got 5 motivational values that I'd like to introduce to you that really deal with how people understand and comprehend better. And these are motivational values that ought to be part of your advertising and marketing and website design. Autonomy and independence is extremely powerful, the most important thing of all. We have independent living as a word, phrases that we have used to describe a certain part of it. I just wish we had a little more independence involved in those places, because lunch will be served from 12 to 1:30, and that's not exactly independent. That's do it if you want. In fact, the boomer generation is more interested in having those rules changed. Connectivity to family, friends, and society, very, very important. Altruism or giving back. Both the older and the boomer group are very much interested and very much contributors to national fundraising campaigns. They're very big givers, and it's very important to them to help change life, making it better for other people. Personal growth, spiritual or mental. One of the things that we do is we continue to grow. There tends to be more of a spiritual tendency to us, not always religious, but spiritual. And our minds tend to grow with age, surprisingly. People don't think that, but certainly it's true. Revitalization is the way we kind of crank it back up again so that we can build up the energies to do things. Rest and relaxation, powerful. Even a change of pace of some kind. Hobbies, travel. Let's look at some pictures that depict people in these motivational values. Here's an older gentleman who has finished his career as an executive, and he is on the side, has been working on his painting. Now he's opened up a studio. Now he has a chance to use his visual and to advance himself onto a next stage. This is an individual who is teaching at high school improvisation theater, providing his knowledge and understanding of something of the past that he can pass on to children and younger people of today. It's a woman working in McDonald's. I find it funny because sometimes I've heard people who are speaking at conferences for seniors who say they don't want to be a Walmart greeter, they don't want to work for McDonald's, and I say, the heck they don't. It connects them to society, and it might be the only connection they can make, but that's really, really powerful to them. And here's the boys on the hockey team, physical, active life in a very tough sport, and they're enjoying themselves, as you can tell. And then there's the great-grandma with generations of her grandkids. Just powerful stuff. Well, let me conclude with a few thoughts. Find out how they are individualistic and treat them as individuals. Control the physical setting, some of the things we talked about, the lighting, the seating. Maybe you have a large barrel pen that's available if you know they're going to have to sign something. In fact, I've had groups that I've spoken to, they go out right away and buy large barrel pens. Lead with the right side of the brain, some of the things we talked about. They want people who are honest and they are looking, and you need to avoid hyperbole or exaggeration. Hey, they've been sold to all their lives. They're professional consumerologists. They've bought it all. They've been burned, they've been happy, and they've been mediocre. And they will be repeat customers and clients if you care for them rightly. Say it in their language, not yours. Listen to the words they're saying, perhaps even doing some reading on books of the old times, or perhaps relating to them some book you've read about the olden days. Emphasize their value system, not your value system. You know, telling them that you've been out on a tear last night and you had quite a few drinks and all that stuff. You know, you think that might be a way of sharing, but that's not necessarily their value system. They don't want their grandchildren necessarily doing those kinds of things. Use the 5 adult motivators we talked about. And finally, go to school on the subject. You've got to continue learning about what it's like to deal with people of age. I'd just like to conclude. I'm Irish, as you can tell, Michael Sullivan, born on St. Paddy's Day. I love this Wizard of Id cartoon. It's the Irish Army. We have the likes of you surrounded. And the old king, who must be a right-brainer, says, there isn't a drop in the house. And the Irish Army says, sure, we'll be moving on. And I, too, shall be moving on. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was a fantastic presentation. We actually had a couple questions. I think we just have time for one. So the question we received is basically, what is your feeling, what is your feedback about the kind of advertising which is currently used by retirement communities? I mean, what room for improvement do you think there is?
Well, I think I've just gone through and explained some of the motivational values, and I wish to heck people would, in fact, when I work with advertising, people who deal in this, you know, in the retirement communities, I really stress those kinds of things. There's too much sameness going on. There's no differentiators. We have the picture of the older couple on the tennis course or the golf course. We have, and by the way, they're not always couples, because when we get past age 60, we have 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 women are widows. And so, you know, the standalone woman doing something significant is what's important. And also the pictures of the mother and daughter, if they're doing something, if they're working on something together that looks like they're sharing her knowledge of things, her, the older mother, knowledge of things. I've written a couple columns, and if you go back and look at the archives for retirement homes, I've written some columns on the advertising. I just see too sameness. I just see people coming from a much younger mental attitude on it, and they're not thinking about the things that are important to people of age. So in many cases, not happy with what I see. In many cases, I think that they should be paying attention to people like myself to make things better.
Okay, thank you again, Michael, for that fascinating webinar. Again, that was Michael Sullivan with 50 Plus Communications Consulting. The full presentation, including all the slides, will be available at retirementhomes.com in the coming days, so check back soon for that. Next month, mark your calendars for Wednesday, February 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when we are pleased to host Irving Stackpole of Stackpole & Associates, who will teach us how to run a top-notch marketing campaign on a shoestring budget. Check retirementhomes.com or contact me at robert@retirementhomes.com for details. Thank you and have a great day.